The stage lights were too bright. That was the first thing anyone noticed. The way they turned the stage into a kind of interrogation room, all that white light pressing down on the two men who stood behind their respective podiums like gladiators waiting for the signal to begin. Donald Trump stood at the podium on the left, his shoulders squared, his chin slightly lifted, the way a man stands when he has practiced confidence in front of mirrors and hotels and the people who have never told him he was wrong. His hands were at his sides, his fingers were still, the suit was navy, the tie was red. The whole picture was a statement: I belong here, I have always belonged here. Barack Obama stood at the podium on the right. He was not smiling, he was not performing. He was watching. That was what he did. He watched and he listened and he waited, the way a man waits when he knows that patience is itself a kind of weapon, when he knows that the room will eventually turn toward the one who does not need to fight for its attention. The moderator had just asked the final question of the night. It was a soft question, the kind that invites reflection, the kind that gives the respondent a chance to say something memorable and leave the audience with a feeling. Trump answered first. He spoke for 4 minutes. He talked about legacy. He talked about what he had done and what he would do and why the future belonged to the people who were willing to fight for it. He talked about the naysayers and the doubters and the people who had never believed in him and how he had proven them wrong every single time. He talked about winning. He talked about it more than once. Then he turned toward Obama. As for my opponent, he said, and his voice dropped into the register he used when he wanted to sound like he was being gracious while being something else entirely. I want to thank him for his service. Really, 8 years in office, a lot of promise, a lot of words. And at the end of the day, what do we have to show for it? Nothing that couldn't have been done better, faster, more efficiently if someone with actual leadership skills had been in charge. But that's over now. That chapter is closed. And the American people have made their choice. They chose me, and I intend to honor that choice every single day. He paused, he let the silence breathe. He turned to face the audience fully. So thank you, Barack. Good luck to you. Enjoy your retirement. You've had your turn. Now it's time for someone else to step up. He smiled. The smile was wide. It was the smile of a man who believed he had just delivered the finishing blow, the knockout punch, the line that would be remembered and replayed and turned into a meme and a headline, and a moment that belonged in the highlight reel he imagined his life was becoming. The room was quiet. Trump sat down. Obama stood up. 14 seconds passed. The stage lights buzzed. Someone in the back of the room coughed once. The cameras zoomed in on Obama's face. He was not angry. He was not flustered. He was simply standing with his hands at his sides, looking at Trump with the calm attention of a man who had just heard something he needed to examine more closely. And now, Obama said, I'd like to respond. But to understand how Donald Trump ended up sitting in that chair with his hands folded and his smile gone, we have to go back to the morning of that debate, to the hotel room where Obama woke up early and looked at himself in the mirror and made a decision about what he would do when the moment came. Obama woke up at 5:00 a.m. The room was dark. The city outside was still asleep, its lights scattered across the skyline like stars that had forgotten to go out. He lay in bed for a few minutes, not thinking about anything in particular, just existing in the quiet, the way he had learned to exist in quiet over the years since the office had ended, since the daily weight of decisions had been replaced by the gentler weight of memory and reflection. The debate was not a presidential debate. It was a commemorative event, a celebration of some anniversary or another, a reason to put two men on a stage and let them talk about the country and its future, and all the things that people talk about when they are given a microphone and an audience, and the particular permission that stages give to people to say things they might not say anywhere else. Obama had agreed to participate because his wife had asked him why he was going, and he had told her the truth. Because someone needs to show the room what it looks like when you are not performing, when you are not fighting for attention, when you are simply present and speaking from the place where the words actually come from. Trump, Obama knew, would come prepared to attack. That was what Trump did. He came into rooms and he asserted himself and he made it clear that he was the most important person in the space and everyone else was the ready to either support him or be dismantled by him. Obama had seen it happen 100 times, in debates and interviews, and the countless public appearances that had defined the years since Trump had entered politics. He had seen the way Trump filled rooms with his presence and his voice, and the absolute certainty that he belonged wherever he was, that the world owed him the stage and the microphone and the audience's attention, because he was Donald Trump, and that was what Donald Trump did. Obama had decided early that morning that he would not fight that. He would not try to compete with it. He would simply be present and he would wait, and when the moment came, he would say the thing that needed to be said. Not to win, not to score points. But because the room needed to hear it, because there were people in that audience who had never seen what it looked like when someone did not need to win. When someone was not performing confidence but simply embodying it. When someone trusted that the truth, spoken quietly, would do more work than any speech could do. He got out of bed, he made coffee, he showered. He put on a grey suit, the same suit he had worn to 100 events, the kind of suit that did not announce itself, that was simply a suit that served the person wearing it rather than trying to be the person wearing it. He looked at himself in the mirror. He did not practice any expressions, he did not rehearse any lines. He simply looked, and what he saw was a man who had been president, who had left the presidency, who had spent years since then figuring out what came after power, and who had arrived at something he believed in deeply. That showing up was itself a form of leadership, that patience was itself a kind of strength, that the measure of a person was not what they did when the cameras were on but what they did when the cameras were off, and the applause had faded, and the room had emptied, and there was nothing left but the basic fact of who they were, and what they had decided to do with the time they had been given. He checked his watch, he walked out the door. Trump arrived at the venue 3 hours early. This was not unusual for him. He liked to be in the space before anyone else, to feel the room, to understand its geometry, to make sure that when he walked onto the stage belonged to him. He walked through the backstage area with his staff around him, reviewing notes and talking through strategy and the particular choreography of expectations that preceded every public appearance he made. His team had prepared a closing statement, a set of final remarks designed to land with maximum impact, to leave the audience with a clear sense of who had won and who had lost. They had worked on it for 2 days. They had refined it, sharpened it, turned it into something that would play well on television and in the headlines that would be written about the event in the hours that followed. Trump had looked at the statement and approved it. It was good. It was strong. It positioned him as the winner, which was where he always wanted to be, which was where he always was in his own mind, because the alternative, a reality where he was not winning, was not a reality he was willing to inhabit. He had told his staff more than once that the secret to success was simply believing you were successful. Not acting like it, not performing it, but believing it, the way you believed in your own existence. The way you believed that the sun would rise tomorrow and the world would continue to turn and you would continue to be at the center of it, because that was what you were made for. He put on the navy suit, he adjusted the red tie. He looked at himself in the mirror and saw what he always saw, Donald Trump, a winner, a fighter. A man who had never lost anything that mattered and never would, because losing was not in his nature. Because the name on the building was proof of what he could accomplish when he put his mind to it. Because the crowds that had gathered at his rallies and the voters who had pulled the lever for him in election after election were proof that the world saw what he saw in himself, that the recognition was real. That the success was not imagined, but confirmed by everyone who looked at him and saw exactly what he saw. He walked onto the stage. The lights were too bright. He did not mind. The first hour of the debate was about policy. The moderator asked questions about the economy and healthcare and foreign policy, and all the other topics that debates were made of, the topics that gave both men a chance to demonstrate their knowledge and their positions, and the particular way they each approached the problems that no one could solve, and everyone had to keep trying to solve anyway. Trump answered with confidence. He cited numbers and statistics, and the things he had accomplished, and the things he would accomplish, and the reason his approach was better than any other. Approach because it was his approach, and his approach had won. Had actually won, in an election that people had said he could not win. Against an opponent who had been the sitting vice president, and who had had all the advantages and all the support and all the things that were supposed to add up to a victory, but had not added up to a victory, because Trump was Trump and Trump did not lose. Obama answered differently. He answered with specificity. He cited data and history and the lessons he had learned from his time in office, the lessons about what worked and what did not work and why certain approaches succeeded while others failed, and how the measure of a good policy was not how it sounded in a stump speech, but how it actually affected the lives of the people it was meant to serve. He did not raise his voice. He did not attack Trump personally. He simply answered the questions and returned to his seat, and folded his hands and waited for the next question. The audience noticed the difference. You could see it in the way they reacted to each answer, The way they leaned forward when Obama spoke and the way they shifted in their seats when Trump spoke. The way the energy in the room moved differently toward each man, like two different currents in the same ocean. Each one real, each one different, neither one stronger than the other in a simple sense, but both of them powerful in their own way. Trump noticed too. He noticed the way the room responded to Obama's calm, the way the silence that followed Obama's answers felt different from the silence that followed his own answers. The way Obama's restraint seemed to create a kind of gravity that pulled the room toward him without him doing anything to create it. This was the thing Trump had always feared about Obama, the thing his father had warned him about, the thing that had made him uncomfortable every time he had seen Obama on television, or in a room, or in any context where Obama's quiet presence had the opportunity to work its particular kind of magic. Obama did not need to fight for the room. The room came to him. And Trump, who had spent his whole life fighting for everything, who had never trusted anything that came easily, who believed that success was earned through struggle and competition and the willingness to dominate, could not understand how that worked, could not figure out how to replicate it, could not do anything except try to be louder and more confident and more present until the room had no choice but to pay attention to him instead. Around the 50-minute mark, the moderator asked a question about leadership. It was a soft question, the kind that invites reflection. Trump answered first. He talked about his business career, about the buildings he had built and the jobs he had created, and the way he had taken risks that other people would not take and succeeded where other people would have failed. He talked about the election, about the victory that no one had predicted, about the message he had sent to the world about what was possible when someone refused to accept the limits that other people tried to place on them. He talked about strength, about not apologizing, about doing what needed to be done even when it was difficult or unpopular or controversial. Then he turned to Obama. And my opponent, he said, he had his chance, 8 years, and what did we get? A healthcare law that was a disaster, a foreign policy that was a mess, an economy that was barely growing. He talks a good game, I'll give him that, he gives good speeches, he makes people feel good about themselves. But at the end of the day, words are not results, and the American people know the difference. They know that I am the one who actually gets things done. They know that I am the one who will actually make their lives better, and they voted for me because they know. He paused, he let the silence breathe. So I want to say to Barack, thank you for your service, seriously. Thank you for what you tried to do, but this is my country now, and I intend to lead it the way it needs to be led, and I don't need any advice from you about how to do that. He smiled, the room went quiet. Obama did not react. He sat in his chair with his hands folded, and his face neutral and his eyes on Trump, watching, waiting, the way he had been waiting all night. The way he had been waiting since the moment he walked onto the stage and saw the lights and felt the weight of the room and understood exactly what kind of night this was going to be. The moderator moved to the next question. The second hour covered similar ground, but the energy had shifted. The audience was more alert now, more engaged, more aware that something was building toward whatever was going to happen at the end, when the closing statements were delivered and the night was over, and the winners and losers would be declared by the people who would spend the next several days arguing about what had happened. Ed and what it meant. Trump was still performing, still confident, still filling the room with his voice and his presence and his absolute certainty that he was winning, that he had always been winning, that the only question in any room he entered was how much he would win by and how quickly everyone else would admit that they had been wrong to doubt him. Obama was still watching. He answered questions when they were asked of him, but his answers were shorter now, more deliberate, the words chosen more carefully, the pauses between sentences longer and more deliberate, the way a man pauses when he is building towards something, when he is waiting for the exact right moment to say the thing that needs to be said. Around the 80-minute mark, the moderator announced that there would be one final question, a closing question, the kind that invites each candidate to leave the audience with a final thought, a closing argument, the thing they want people to remember when the debate is over and the coverage begins and the narrative is being built. Trump answered first. He spoke about legacy. He spoke about what he had accomplished in his first term and what he would accomplish in his second. He spoke about the naysayers and the doubters, and the people who had never believed in him, and how he had proven them wrong at every turn, how he had taken their skepticism and their criticism and their ridicule, and turned it into fuel, into motivation, into the energy that drove him forward every day toward the goals he had set for himself and for the country he was leading. He talked about winning, he talked about it more than once. And then he turned to Obama. And as for my opponent, he said, and his voice took on the particular tone it took when he was being gracious while being something else, I want to thank him for his service. Really, 8 years in office, a lot of promise, a lot of words. And at the end of the day, what do we have to show for it? Nothing that couldn't have been done better, faster, more efficiently if someone with actual leadership skills had been in charge. But that's over now. That chapter is closed. And the American people have made their choice. They chose me, and I intend to honor that choice every single day. He paused, he let the silence breathe. He turned to face the audience fully. So thank you, Barack. Good luck to you, enjoy your retirement. You've had your turn. Now it's time for someone else to step up. He smiled, the smile was wide. It was the smile of a man who believed he had just delivered the finishing blow. The room was quiet. Trump sat down. The first silence of the night came at the 86-minute mark, after Trump's closing statement and before Obama's response. It lasted 9 seconds. 9 seconds of nothing. Nothing but the hum of the stage lights and the soft whir of the camera operators adjusting their equipment, and the faint sound of someone in the audience breathing, just breathing, the way people breathe when they are waiting for something important to happen, and they do not want to miss it. Trump sat in his chair with his hands folded and his smile still in place. He was watching Obama. He was waiting for Obama to stand up and give whatever response he was going to give, and he believed, with the absolute certainty that had defined his entire life, that the response would not matter, that the room had already been won, that the narrative had already been established, that the American people would remember Trump's words and forget whatever Obama said in response, because Trump's words were bigger and louder and more memorable, and that was the way it always worked. That was the way it had always worked. That was the way it would always work, because bigger and louder and more memorable was always better than quiet and measured and restrained. Obama stood up. He did not move toward the podium immediately. He stood behind his chair for a moment with his hands at his sides, looking at Trump. The look was not angry. It was not hostile. It was simply attentive, the way you look at something you are trying to understand, something you are examining from multiple angles before you decide how to respond to it. Then he walked to the podium. 14 seconds passed. And now, Obama said, I'd like to respond. There is a particular kind of silence that happens in a room when someone has said something they believe is final, and the person they said it to stands up and says they want to respond. It is not the silence of anticipation, exactly, and it is not the silence of confusion. It is something else. A silence that holds its breath, a silence that is waiting to see if the person who has been attacked will fight back or crumble, will match the energy or fall below it, will prove that the attack was effective or prove that it was not. This silence lasted 12 seconds. Trump was watching, his smile had not faded, his hands were still folded. He was waiting for Obama to start talking so that he could start judging, could start calculating how the response would play, could start preparing the counter-response he would give in the spin that would happen in the hours after the debate, when the coverage began and the narrative was being built, and every word would be analyzed and interpreted and turned into whatever the people telling the story wanted it to become. Obama looked at the audience, he looked at the cameras, he looked at Trump. Then he began. Let me start by thanking my opponent for his kind words, Obama said. His voice was calm. It was the same voice he had used all night, the same voice he had used for 8 years in office, the voice that did not rise when it needed to land a point, the voice that did not strain when it needed to carry weight, the voice that understood that the words themselves were enough and the delivery was just the vehicle for them. He thanked me for my service. He said I had my turn. He said it was time for someone else to step up. Obama paused, he looked at Trump. I want to take him at his word. I want to take his words at face value, because he said something important tonight, something that deserves to be examined, not attacked, not dismissed, but examined. He said that the measure of a leader is results. He said that words are not results. He said that the American people know the difference between someone who talks a good game and someone who actually gets things done. Obama turned to face the audience fully. So let's talk about results. Let's talk about what actually happened. Let's talk about the things that were done and the things that were not done and the difference between them. The room was completely still. My opponent has said that my administration produced nothing of value, that the economy was barely growing, that our foreign policy was a mess, that the things I accomplished were minor and could have been done better by someone else. He has said this many times in many places to many audiences, and I want to ask him a simple question. Obama paused. He looked at Trump. When you were campaigning 4 years ago, and you said that you would produce the best healthcare plan in the history of the country, and I remember this, I remember it clearly. You also said that everyone would be covered, that costs would go down, that the system would be better than anything that had come before. Do you remember saying that? The room stirred. The cameras zoomed in on Trump's face. His smile was thinner now. His hands were still folded, but there was a tension in them that had not been there before. You said that your plan would be beautiful, Obama continued. You said it would cover everyone and cost less and be easier to understand than anything that had come before. And then, when you became president, you spent 4 years trying to undo what had come before, without ever actually replacing it with anything that covered more people or cost less money, or was easier to understand. Obama paused. He let the silence breathe for 3 seconds. So I want to go back to what my opponent said. Words are not results, that is true, that is an important truth, and I accept it completely. Words are not results. And when we look at the results, I think we should all ask ourselves, what were we promised, and what was delivered, and is there a difference between the two? The room was quiet. The second silence of the night came at the 90-minute mark, after Obama's response and before Trump could react to it. It lasted 16 seconds. 16 seconds of nothing. Nothing but the weight of what had just been said, the recognition that something had shifted, the sense that the room was recalculating, that the narrative that had been so confidently established by Trump's closing statement was now being examined from a different angle, through a different lens, with a different set of criteria for what counted as a result and what did not. Trump's face had changed. The smile was gone, not replaced by anger or embarrassment, just gone, replaced by something else, something harder to name, something that looked like the expression of a man who had just been shown something he had not expected to see, something that had disrupted the story he had been telling himself about how the night would go and how it would end, and who would be declared the winner by the people who were watching, and the people who would be writing about it in the days that followed. Obama stood at the podium with his hands at his sides. He had not raised his voice. He had not attacked. He had simply asked a question, had simply offered a mirror, had simply held up the words that Trump himself had spoken and asked him to account for the distance between those words and the actual results. The room was waiting. Trump opened his mouth. Nothing came out. He closed it, he opened it again, he looked at the moderator, he looked at the audience, he looked at Obama. He did not speak. 9 seconds passed. The moderator cleared his throat. Mr. President, he said to Obama, do you have any final comments? The third silence of the night came at the 94-minute mark, after Obama had delivered his final comments, and before the moderator called for the end of the debate. It lasted 8 seconds. 8 seconds of the room absorbing what had just happened, what had just been said, what had just been revealed in the space between Trump's confident declaration and Obama's quiet response. Obama had not delivered a long speech. He had delivered 4 sentences. I have always believed, he said, that the measure of a person is not whether they are in charge but how they behave when they are not. I have always believed that legacy is not about what you accomplish but about how you treat people along the way. I have always believed that the truth, spoken quietly, does more work than any performance. And I have always believed that the American people are smart enough to judge for themselves. He paused, he looked at Trump. Thank you for the opportunity to be here tonight, and thank you for your words. They gave me a lot to think about. He sat down. The room was still. The moderator looked at the clock. He looked at the 2 men sitting at their respective podiums, one with his hands folded and his expression unreadable, one with his head slightly bowed and his eyes on the floor. He looked at the audience, at the cameras, at the stage lights that were still too bright and still buzzing at their frequency just above hearing. Thank you both, he said. That concludes our debate. The room did not erupt. Debates do not end with eruptions. They end with the slow dispersal of an audience that has been sitting for too long and is ready to go home and process what they have seen and heard and felt over the course of the evening. The cameras were powered down. The stage lights were dimmed. The staff members came out from the wings and began the work of clearing the stage, of removing the podiums and the chairs and the water bottles and all the other small debris that accumulates during events like this one. Trump stood up first, he buttoned his jacket. He looked at the audience, he did not look at Obama. He walked toward the exit, toward the backstage area where his staff was waiting, toward the car that was waiting in the parking garage, toward the next event, the next appearance, the next moment when he would be in front of an audience and able to tell the story he wanted to tell about what had happened and why it did not matter, and how the narrative would be corrected by the time the sun came up tomorrow. He did not succeed. The thing about a mirror is that it does not attack, it does not insult, it does not raise its voice or make threats or issue challenges. It simply reflects. It shows you what is there exactly as it is, without interpretation or commentary or the softening that comes from the filters we apply to everything we see and everything we do. And when Trump looked at himself in the mirror Obama had held up, he did not see what he expected to see. He did not see the winner he believed he was. He did not see the confident leader he had been performing all night. He saw the gap. He saw the distance between the words he had spoken and the results he had produced. He saw the promise and the failure and the silence that had followed when he could not explain the difference. He walked out the door without looking back. Obama stood up a few minutes later. He was not in a hurry, he was never in a hurry. He gathered his materials, his notes, the water bottle he had not touched, the small personal items that accumulated during events like this one. He looked at the stage, at the empty chairs, at the lights that were dimming. He thought about the night. He thought about the question he had asked and the silence that had followed and the look on Trump's face when the mirror had been held up. He was not triumphant. That was not what this was about. This was not about winning a debate or scoring points or proving that one person was better than another. This was about something else. This was about the opportunity to stand in front of a room and demonstrate that there was another way to be in it. A way that did not require noise or performance or the constant assertion of dominance. A way that trusted that the truth, spoken quietly, would do its work without needing to be amplified or repeated or turned into a spectacle. He walked out into the hallway. The fluorescent lights were the same fluorescent lights they had always been, harsh and unforgiving, and designed for function rather than beauty. He passed the staff members and the security personnel and the reporters who were waiting for quotes and the volunteers who had spent the evening checking credentials and guiding people to their seats. He passed all of them without stopping. He did not have anything to say that had not already been said. The words were in the room had absorbed them. That was enough. He walked out into the night. This is the part where most people leave. The debate is over, the coverage has begun. The headlines are being written and the analysis is being produced and the arguments are being made about who won and who lost and what it all means for the country and its future. The story is complete. The moment has passed. There is nothing left but the aftermath, the spin, the endless processing of something that happened once and will never happen exactly the same way again. But if you're still here, there is something worth staying for. The reason this story matters is not because Obama won. He did not win in any way that can be measured, not in points or polls or any of the other metrics that we use to determine who came out ahead in a contest. He answered a question. He held up a mirror. He asked Trump to account for the gap between his words and his results. He did not insult him. He did not attack him. He simply reflected, and in the reflection something was revealed. What matters is what was revealed, not to the audience, not to the cameras, not to the people who would spend the next several days arguing about the outcome. What matters is what was revealed to Trump himself in the moment when the mirror was held up and he could not look away from what it showed him. The gap, the silence, the distance between what he had promised and what he had produced. That is the moment that changes things. Not the debate, not the coverage, not the narrative that gets built around what happened, but the moment when a person sees themselves clearly without the filters they usually apply, without the story they usually tell themselves about who they are and what they have done. That moment is rare. It is uncomfortable. It is the kind of moment that most people avoid because it is easier to keep telling the story than to face the gap between the story and the truth. Obama did not need to attack Trump. He did not need to win. He just needed to stand up and ask the question and let the silence do its work. And in that silence something shifted, not completely, not permanently, but something, a crack in the armor, a moment of doubt in a mind that had been armored against doubt for as long as it could remember. The beginning of a question that would not be easy to answer. That is the hope, that is the only hope, and it is enough. The car was waiting at the curb. Obama got in. He sat in the back seat. He looked out the window at the city that was still moving, still changing, still becoming something that no one could predict. He thought about the night, about the silence, About the moment when Trump had opened his mouth and nothing had come out, when the confident performance had cracked and something else had shown through, something that looked like the recognition of a gap that could not be easily explained away or spun into a different story. He thought about what Trump would do with that moment. Whether he would dismiss it, deny it, turn it into something else entirely, or whether he would sit with it for a while, turn it over in his mind. Consider the possibility that the mirror was accurate and the gap was real, and the silence was not a temporary glitch, but a permanent feature of the landscape he had created. He did not know, he could not know. That was not his job. His job was to show up and speak the truth, and trust that the truth would do its work in its own time and its own way, whether anyone acknowledged it or not, whether anyone understood it or not, whether anyone remembered it a week later or a month later or a year later. The car drove on. The city moved past. And somewhere in a building that bore his name, Donald Trump was sitting in a room, thinking about the question, turning it over, examining it from every angle, trying to figure out how to make it go away, how to explain it, how to turn it into something that fit the story he was telling himself about who he was and what he had done, and why the gap did not matter, because he was still a winner and winners did not have to account for gaps. He would not find the answer, not tonight, maybe not ever. But the question was there, the mirror had been held, and in the silence that followed something had shifted. That was enough, that was always enough. The city lights blurred past. The night continued. And the question remained, sitting in the space where the debate had been, waiting for whoever was willing to look at it honestly, willing to see what it was showing, willing to do the work that needed to be done before the work could begin. Who are you when the words and the results do not match? That is the question. That was always the question. And the answer was in the room, waiting, patient, ready to be found. By anyone who was willing to look.